I'm sure you've seen photographers using gray cards. There's a reason why. If you correct the image so that what should be gray is gray, chances are you fix a lot of other problems with the image. If there is a cast to the image, doing that, doing the correction that it takes to make neutral things neutral will often fix a whole lot of other problems with the image. So this is an RGB image. Now, of course, part of the problem is, at least for us in pre-press, was always we didn't shoot the picture, so we don't know what it ought to look like. And we have to kind of make some assumptions. If you inherit a picture and you're not sure, gee, does it have a color cast? Maybe that kind of is a blue thing. If you can find anything you know ought to be neutral in that image and work from that, then you've got a pretty good shot. If it's an outdoor picture and there's some, some tarmac, well, that's black. Where it's lit, it ought to be a shade of gray. Okay, there's something you can hang your hat on. If somebody's wearing a black shirt where they're lit, assuming that the light is neutral, and this is a little bit warm, so that might shake things up. But if you can make that go neutral, you've got a shot at it. Because the thing is, when we look at stuff as human beings, we tend to zero out. We have kind of our own internal white balance. Even if there's incandescent lights in a room, we see these tablecloths as white, even though to a camera's innocent eye, it's going to look yellowish or reddish. So here's the story about this. This is Russell Brown, who is an art director at Adobe and an all-around crazy man, who dressed up as a statue. He and an assistant of his, and this was at a conference, and they were carrying their little stands around with them. So they did this all during lunch, and then when we all came back, there they were outside the doors of the conference room. And it was easy to that's Russell. But for the little old lady that was passing by him when he said, "How you doing, ma'am?" And she looked at her husband like, "Saul, it's happening again." The statues are talking, just go to the room. So I tell you this to tell you that I know that Russell should be nice, neutral gray. He's not supposed to look like pink marble. He's supposed to be neutral. So there's something we can hang our hats on. So I'm going to do a very simplistic correction here. But this is great. It works very well with RGB images. It's a little tougher with CMYK. I'm a CMYK girl. That's what I was raised on because of printing. And I feared RGB because I didn't understand it. But it turns out there are a lot of corrections that are a little easier to make in RGB. For one thing, the numbers for neutrality are even. The same value, approximately, red, green, and blue, makes for neutral. If you're trying to do it with a CMYK image, the cyan has to be a little higher. It's a long story why, but it's a little harder to keep straight in your brain. Have them all the same, I can keep that straight. And you have more range of colors in an RGB image if you think, and this is not to scale, but what we can see as human beings, what you can display in RGB, which is colors of light, what you can print in CMYK. So there's quite a smaller color space in CMYK. So anymore, what I do, because of the ease of doing some corrections, and certainly there are some filters, most filters you can only run in RGB, I keep my stuff in RGB till the last minute. If I'm printing it at home on my own printers, I just keep it RGB. If you're sending it to a commercial printer that doesn't mind that, find out ahead of time. If you're working full color managed workflow, you can keep it in RGB. If you are required to send to CMYK, well, just don't convert till the end and keep your RGB image in case you ever want to go back to it. So in the case of Russell, I'm going to use levels. Now, here's the thing that changed at CS4. They gave us this adjustments panel. So there are things that have happened to all the software in the last version or two that actually make it easier for new users to do the right thing. Sometimes it confuses us, I don't want to say old users, experienced users, because it's a little bit different way of doing things. Well, the adjustments panel, what that lets you do is create an adjustments layer. Remember I said I want to work non-destructively. So instead of messing stuff up, I'm not changing any pixels, I'm just putting a color correction layer on top of things. So the way this adjustments panel works, and let me just dislodge this little guy, is it gives you all the options here. Hey, which kind of adjustment do you want to make? When you pick it, I think of this like a little card, like a little instruction card. When you pick it, it turns over, and on the back it's showing you the controls. Because what happens the first time you encounter this, you wait for half an hour for a dialogue to come up, and it's never going to come up. It's actually right here. So when you look at this histogram, isn't that a great impressive word? It's just the distribution of pixels of certain values in the document. So this is where we should have some highlight values, and this is where we should have some shadow values. Clearly, we have a famine here. So a couple of different ways you can do this, but I kind of like doing it visually. Drag this over. I think of it like swimming to shore. And in doing so, what I've done is I've said, hey, Photoshop, I know I have kind of dingy highlights. Take the lightest pixels you can find and map them to what you believe is a decent highlight value. And that's just based on some default settings, which you can change. Same thing here. I'm going to drag the little shadow, the black point slider, and it's going to take the darkest pixels and make them, map them to a shadow version. So if you want to look at before and after, it's a little stark now. You know, in real life, I probably would back off a little bit on, you know, you still are able to exercise some judgment. But let me ask you this, does he look sharper now? So that's what I'm saying. If you increase contrast, because they'll come to you and say, can you make this sharper? Like, I can't fix the bad focus. You know, if it's too far gone, even contrast isn't going to help. But often, if you fix anemic contrast, it's enough to make it sharper. So here's the big payoff, though. The other way to do that, pick a good white point, pick a good black point, is by using these little eyedroppers, black point, white point. So you go into a part of the image and use that as a basis. But the third one, the middle guy, is not for pick a midpoint, it's for pick a gray point. This is where you set neutral. So it's going to work best if you go for a mid-level gray, and if you go for like a white collar or something like that, it's going to skew the results, or something way deep in the shadows. So try to find a mid-level gray, which I think his chest here ought to do. So when I click, now your eye is so sick of looking at this that it takes it a minute and he looks green, doesn't he? But let's look at before, flat and purple, and after. And hey, now the wood looks right, doesn't it? When you do this, you won't be doing a running commentary. You'll go click, 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 and you're out of there. So is that kind of cool? And then, by the way, this is in your book too. So here's my adjustment layer. If I come back next week and go, oh no, I want it to look horrible and flat, okay, just turn off the eyeball there. Keep in mind too, those of you who are heading toward InDesign, you could keep that adjustments layer, I think, if you wanted, you know, if you're working in an all RGB workflow. Kind of cool? Alrighty.